In the shadows of old Hollywood, love was a dangerous game, especially for those who dared to feel it differently. Behind the glamour and golden lights were stars forced to bury their truth, trade passion for silence, and live romances no one could ever know. This is not just a tale of fame. It is the haunting story of forbidden love and the heartbreaking price they paid for it. Montgomery Clift, wounded by a love he could never name. Montgomery Clift was the beautiful tragedy of classic Hollywood. With sculpted features and eyes full of unspoken sorrow, he redefined masculinity on screen, not through toughness, but through vulnerability. Audiences fell in love with his quiet intensity, but behind that gaze was a man carrying a weight he couldn't speak of, a love he could never live openly. Monty, as friends called him, had relationships that were deep, real, and lasting with men. But in the 1950s, such love had to remain hidden, especially for someone so famous. He lived in fear of being exposed, of losing everything, not because he lacked talent, but because the world couldn't accept who he truly was. Every smile at a press event, every staged photo with a female co-star was part of a role he never auditioned for. Then came the night that changed everything. In 1956, after leaving a dinner party at Elizabeth Taylor's house, his closest friend and ally, Monty crashed his car. The accident shattered his face, and with it, the mask he had been wearing for years. The world saw scars, but what it didn't see were the deeper wounds, the collapse of identity, the heartbreak of a man who could no longer hide behind beauty. After the crash, Monty's life turned inward. He avoided interviews, retreated from friends, and drowned in pills and alcohol. But what truly broke him wasn't pain. It was the loneliness of loving in silence. He once told a friend, "I just want to be loved without punishment." In a world where even a glance could spark rumors, he never got that chance. He kept acting, delivering unforgettable performances. But behind the brilliance was a man drifting further from himself. Montgomery Clift didn't fall from grace. He was pushed by a world that made authenticity a liability. And when he passed, it wasn't the accident that took him. It was the years of hiding, of aching for a love that never got to breathe. His story isn't just about loss, it's about what happens when the world denies you the most human thing of all, the freedom to love without fear. Rock Hudson, America's sweetheart, who couldn't love freely. Rock Hudson was the kind of man every studio dreamed of. Tall, charming, with a voice that could melt through silence, he was the picture-perfect leading man. On screen, he romanced the most beautiful women in Hollywood. Off-screen, he carried a secret that ruled his entire life. The love he felt was never allowed to be shown. He didn't get to live like other stars. While others flaunted relationships and smiled for the cameras, Rock was rehearsing a performance far more exhausting than any film, pretending that his heart wanted what it didn't. His dates were staged, his interviews scripted, and the truth buried under layers of studio PR and private shame. In a world obsessed with image, his real life became a series of locked doors and whispered phone calls. But Rock was more than an actor. He was a man who longed for connection. He had lovers, deep relationships that mattered, but every moment came with fear. What if someone found out? What if this love, so natural to him, cost him everything he had built? And in the end, it did. When Rock's health declined in the 1980s, the world saw a different man. Not the hero from romantic comedies, but someone frail, tired, and suddenly vulnerable. It was then, in the most unexpected way, that his truth finally came out. The public learned he was living with a serious illness, one linked to a community the world still judged harshly. And suddenly, the fantasy collapsed. But in that collapse, something remarkable happened. Rock Hudson, who had spent a lifetime hiding, became a symbol of truth. His name brought awareness to a crisis the world tried to ignore. His face, once used to sell perfection, now stood for something painfully human, the cost of hiding who you are, just to be accepted. Rock passed without ever fully getting to love out loud. No wedding, no public kiss, no headline celebrating a partner who stood by him. Just quiet departures behind closed curtains. And that is the tragedy, not that he lived a lie, but that he was never allowed to live his truth. Tab Hunter, Hollywood's heartthrob with a hidden heart. Tab Hunter looked like the perfect 1950s dream. Blonde hair, dazzling smile, athletic build, He was every girl's fantasy and every studio executive's golden ticket. His face was on teen magazines, his voice on the radio, and his movies packed theaters. But behind that wholesome image was a truth too risky to speak. Tab Hunter was in love, but not with the people fans imagined. From the start, Tab knew what was expected of him. His managers arranged dates with starlets, and reporters followed him like he was royalty. But those dates were performances, moments staged to protect his career. At night, when the cameras stopped rolling, Tab's real life began. He fell in love with men, quietly, deeply, but always with the fear that one exposed moment could bring it all crashing down. That fear wasn't unfounded. In the early days of his fame, Tab was caught up in a police raid at a private gathering. Though his studio worked overtime to clean up the story, the shame lingered like a shadow. He became more cautious, more distant. Even love, something that should have brought joy, became something to hide, to protect, to fear. But Tab wasn't bitter. He didn't blame Hollywood for the rules. It was the only system he had ever known. Still, it hurt. The roles stopped coming, his name slowly faded from billboards. And while he kept acting, it was never the same. The boy who once symbolized young love became a man watching that same love slip further out of reach. Years later, in his 70s, Tab finally told the world who he really was. In his memoir, Tab Hunter Confidential, he opened up about his secret relationships, including a long and complicated romance with fellow actor Anthony Perkins. The book wasn't a scandal, it was a sigh of relief. For once, he didn't have to pretend. By then, Hollywood had moved on, but Tab had found peace. He spent his final years with his longtime partner, Alan Glazer, living quietly without apology. Yet one cannot help but wonder, what would his life have looked like if love had been allowed to bloom in the light instead of hiding in the shadows? Sal Mineo, the outsider, Hollywood forgot too soon. Sal Mineo was never quite like the others. While his co-stars basked in the safe glow of stardom, Sal burned with a different kind of fire, bold, sensitive, and far more honest than Hollywood was ready for. His role in Rebel Without a Cause wasn't just a performance, it was a mirror. He wasn't pretending to be misunderstood. He was misunderstood. As his fame rose, Sal found himself playing characters who, like him, didn't quite fit in. But off-screen, his real life was far more complicated. He was drawn to men, emotionally, romantically, and he knew that one wrong headline could ruin everything. Still, he refused to live completely in fear. In quiet corners of Los Angeles, he built relationships, held on to affection where he could find it, and poured his truth into every line he spoke on stage or film. But the industry changed, and so did the phone calls. Roles became scarce. Casting directors stopped calling. The more honest Sal became with himself, the more invisible he became to Hollywood. But he never gave up. He returned to the stage where the scripts were raw and real, closer to the person he had always been. In the mid-1970s, Sal felt a new chapter opening. He had landed a promising role in a bold new play, and for the first time in years, there was momentum. Hope. A comeback not just in career, but in self. Yet one night, after rehearsal, that hope was abruptly taken from him. The details are still painful for those who knew and loved him. But what hurts even more is how quickly the world moved on. There were no grand tributes, no Hollywood vigils, just quiet shrugs and fading headlines. Sal Mineo had once been a trailblazer, an icon of teenage angst, and yet when he was gone, it was as if his story had ended before it was truly heard. But here, in this space, we remember. We reclaim voices that were once silenced. And if you believe that stories like Sal's deserve to be told, honored, and never forgotten, then please take a second to subscribe to the channel. It helps us shine a light on those who lived in the shadows and whose truths still matter. William Haines, the star who chose love over Hollywood before Rock Hudson, before Montgomery Clift. There was William Haines, a silent film heartthrob who made audiences swoon with just a look. He was charming, wildly successful, and one of the highest paid actors of the 1920s. But Haines carried a secret that, in those days, could end everything. He was unapologetically in love with a man. Unlike many stars who were forced to live double lives, William didn't pretend. He was in a long-term relationship with Jimmy Shields, a bond as real and steady as any Hollywood marriage. They lived together, traveled together, and loved each other openly among close friends. In private circles, they were simply Bill and Jimmy. But to the public, that love had to be invisible. It wasn't long before the studio caught wind. MGM's Louis B. Mayer, the most powerful man in Hollywood at the time, gave Haines an ultimatum: end the relationship and agree to marry a woman for the cameras, or lose everything. For many, that choice would have been simple. But not for William. Without hesitation, he walked away from fame to stay true to the man he loved. Hollywood erased him almost overnight. Roles vanished, invitations stopped. The same town that once adored him turned its back. But William didn't crumble. He reinvented himself, becoming a highly successful interior designer for Hollywood's elite. Ironically, the stars who once worked beside him now paid him to redesign their homes. The man they rejected never stopped shining, just in a different light. And through it all, Jimmy never left his side. For over 50 years, they remained together, through exile, reinvention, and finally, quiet recognition. In an industry that punished honesty, their relationship endured as a quiet rebellion, a testament to choosing love even when it costs everything. William Haines didn't end his life in heartbreak. He lived it with defiance and pride. His story isn't one of tragedy, it's one of strength. He was the first to stand tall and say, "I'd rather be true to myself and lose the world than lie and lose my soul." Anthony Perkins, a life scripted by fear, not love. Anthony Perkins terrified audiences as Norman Bates in Psycho, but in real life, it was fear of a different kind that haunted him. Not the fear of monsters or murderers, but of being discovered, of being known, of having his truth exposed in a world that would not accept it. In the quiet spaces behind the camera, Anthony was drawn to men. He shared a deep, complicated love with fellow actor Tab Hunter, one that could have been tender and freeing if only it had existed in a different time. But instead of romance, their relationship was cloaked in caution. Studio contracts, agents, and the media all made one thing clear. If he wanted to stay famous, Anthony would have to play a part, off-screen as well as on, and so he played it. For decades, he dated women in public, avoided any situation that might invite speculation, and even underwent therapy in hopes of changing what could never be changed. The pressure to conform was relentless. Even when his career soared, his spirit stayed guarded. He lived behind carefully built walls, rehearsing every answer, editing every smile, making sure the world saw what it wanted, not who he truly was. Then, in 1973, Anthony shocked Hollywood by marrying photographer Barry Berenson. For many, it was the final act in a well-maintained performance. But to those close to him, it was far more complicated. He cared for Barry deeply, and together they built a family. Yet many believed it was not a rewriting of his identity, but a way to make peace with a world that had refused to accept the full version of him. He continued to act, to direct, to create. But those who knew him best said he remained a deeply private man, carrying the weight of secrets he never dared to name aloud. His life became a quiet surrender to survival, one that cost him the chance to love freely, to live openly, to feel truly seen. And in that silence we are reminded, sometimes the greatest horror is not what we show the world, but what we are forced to hide. Greta Garbo, the woman who chose silence over scandal. Greta Garbo was Hollywood's most famous mystery. She didn't chase fame, it chased her. With her icy stare, velvet voice, and distant aura, she captivated the world by doing the very thing no one else dared, saying almost nothing. "I want to be alone," she famously whispered on screen. But behind that phrase was a deeper truth. She needed to be alone, to protect the secret that lived in her heart. While tabloids tried to spin tales of lovers and luxury, those close to Garbo knew another story. She had deep, meaningful relationships with women, most notably with playwright Mercedes de Acosta. Their letters spoke of passion, longing, and quiet devotion. But in a world where a whisper could end a career, Greta knew the risk. So she stepped back. She let the spotlight shine, but never too closely. She became a legend not just for what she gave, but for what she withheld. Garbo never married. She never confirmed a romance, never gave Hollywood the confessions it craved. Instead, she disappeared. At the height of her fame, she walked away. No press release, no farewell tour, just vanished. She retreated to a quiet life in New York, avoiding interviews, cameras, and even old friends. Decades passed, and still, the world waited for answers that would never come. Some called her reclusive, others eccentric. But maybe she was simply free. Free from pretending, from hiding, from loving on someone else's terms. Or maybe deep down she carried the pain of never being able to love in the light. She lived out her days in silence. No big goodbye, no final bow. Just Greta, walking the streets in sunglasses and scarves, the past trailing behind her like perfume. In a world that demanded she be everything to everyone, Greta Garbo chose to be something else entirely. A woman who would rather vanish than lie about her heart. Ramon Novarro, a leading man lost in the shadows. Long before Hollywood had sound, Ramon Novarro had presence. His eyes told stories. His smile lit up theaters. As the star of Ben-Hur 1925, he became one of silent cinema's most beloved icons, and one of its most guarded secrets. Ramon wasn't just playing roles on screen, he was performing off-screen too. Constantly calculating, constantly hiding. Born into a conservative Catholic family, Ramon's truth was never meant for public consumption. In private, he loved men, tenderly, deeply. But in public, he was the picture of discretion. While fans fantasized about a romantic Latin lover, Ramon was navigating a dangerous double life, where a single rumor could destroy everything he had built. For years, he lived behind heavy curtains and drawn blinds. He turned down big contracts, distanced himself from press tours, and avoided parties unless he knew he was safe. Fame became a cage, and love, a risk he could rarely afford. Even when he found brief companionship, it was fleeting, hidden, and clouded with fear. As the golden age faded and the roles stopped coming, Ramon chose a life of quiet retreat. He found solace in music, art, and faith, but never in lasting love. He spent decades mostly alone, living in a modest home in the Hollywood Hills, far from the studios that once celebrated him. For someone who once captivated millions, the silence was deafening. Then, one evening in 1968, his name returned to the headlines, not for a comeback, but for a tragedy. The circumstances surrounding his final days remain haunting and shrouded in sorrow. What should have been a peaceful later chapter in life became a reminder of how dangerous it was, for so long, to simply exist as a gay man, even in your own home. Hollywood never gave Ramon the recognition he deserved. No retrospectives, no awards. Just a fading memory of a star who once shined too brightly and was then forgotten too quickly. But we remember. Because Ramon's story is more than an ending, it's a warning. About silence, about shame, about how a world that refuses to see the truth often loses its most brilliant lights. Dirk Bogarde, the silence that spoke louder than words. Dirk Bogarde was a master of subtlety. On screen, he could say more with a glance than most actors could with a monologue. He played complex men, intellectuals, outsiders, romantics, burdened by secrets. But the most complicated role he ever played was himself. For decades, Bogarde was one of Britain's most respected actors. He earned acclaim for roles that pushed boundaries, none more daring than in Victim, 1961, where he played a closeted barrister blackmailed for his sexuality. It was the first English-language film to openly discuss being gay, and it was shocking. Bold, revolutionary, and strangely very personal. Many assumed the role was just acting, but those closest to Dirk knew it cut far deeper. Behind closed doors, he shared his life with Anthony Forwood, a relationship that spanned more than 40 years. They traveled together, lived together, loved together. Yet Dirk never confirmed it publicly. Not once. Even as society began to change, even as former co-stars came out and shared their truth, Dirk remained silent. In interviews, he dodged questions. In memoirs, he spoke of companionship but never called it what it was. His words painted around the truth, never through it. And perhaps that silence was his armor, his way of protecting what mattered most in a world that had once made him afraid to speak. But that choice came at a cost. For all his success, Bogarde lived with a loneliness that fame could not cure. After Anthony became ill, Dirk became his sole caretaker, withdrawing from the public eye entirely. And when Anthony was gone, so too was Dirk's last tether to a life lived quietly but fully. In the end, Bogarde's story is one of aching contradiction. He played roles that broke taboos, that helped others feel seen, yet never allowed himself that same freedom. He opened doors for a generation while choosing to stand just outside them. His silence was not cowardice. It was survival. But it also left us wondering, What might his legacy have been had he allowed the world to see the full picture? And how many more like him chose silence, not because they wanted to, but because the cost of speaking was simply too high? Liberace, the showman who hid behind the spotlight. No one sparkled quite like Liberace. With his rhinestone suits, grand pianos, and mile-wide smile, he wasn't just a performer, he was a spectacle. Audiences adored his over-the-top style and called him Mr. Showmanship. But behind the sequins and candelabras was a man carrying the weight of one exhausting performance, pretending to be someone he was not. Liberace was, without question, a gay man. And yet, he denied it his entire life. Loudly, publicly, and, at times, with a theatrical flair that almost made the lie feel like part of the act. When rumors swirled, he didn't just stay silent, he sued. In 1956, he took a British newspaper to court for implying he was homosexual and won, claiming it had damaged his reputation. The irony? He accepted the damages while living with his much younger male lover at the time. His denial wasn't just for legal drama, it was survival. Liberace built his empire on being loved by Middle America, and in the 1950s and 60s, being gay could end a career overnight. So he leaned into a carefully crafted image, flirtatious with women, shy about relationships, and always deflecting with humor. He joked, "I don't mind being called flamboyant, but don't ever call me a fruit." Audiences laughed, never knowing the cost of the punchline. As the years passed, the act never stopped. Behind closed doors, Liberace had deep, passionate relationships, some joyful, others troubled, but none of them were ever truly acknowledged. When a former partner sued him for palimony in the 1980s, Liberace denied the relationship even existed. In court, under oath, the man who lived in gold-dusted excess was still too afraid to admit that he loved. In 1987, Liberace's life came to a quiet end, and once again, the truth was hidden. Initial reports cited natural causes. It wasn't until later that the real story came out. Even in death, the performance had to be protected. Liberace once said, "Too much of a good thing is wonderful." But for him, too much fear, too much shame, and too much pressure to pretend robbed him of something truly wonderful: the freedom to love without disguise. They loved in silence, feared the truth, and paid the price for simply being themselves. These were not just stars, they were people who ached, hoped, and hid because the world demanded it. But their stories didn't end in whispers. With every view, every comment, every share, you help bring their truth back to light. Subscribe if you believe love should never be hidden again.